All right. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Okay, I'm getting us set up for Facebook Live, so bear
All
with
right.
us. We've got people coming in.
People coming in. Here we go.
Happy Monday. It's a beautiful sunny day here in South Georgia. It's starting to get pretty humid though. Cortni and Bert, I bet it's pretty humid in Texas.
Yes, very hot, very humid for sure.
Yeah, I think that's everywhere. Denver too. We're in the upper 90s all week. Crazy hot.
Gosh.
In Denver? Wow.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting there.
All right. Yes, filling up. Here we go.
Wow, let's see who we got. Hey, Adam, Elise, Dr. Grant. I want everybody to know Dr. Grant now has 2 new hips. He just got the one. It's amazing technology. Bert, that's something you can definitely talk to us about technology, but he had his surgery Tuesday and he's walking a few hours, right? We went and saw him yesterday. And he's doing awesome. So it's amazing what technology can do. All right, it looks like we're live on Facebook. Good. We'll give it another minute. Got Devontae, who's starting his own business in South Georgia, doing public relations and digital marketing. So somebody needs some help. Great young kid that was at ABAC with us, and Elise is sporting his ABAC shirt. Jennifer has been faithful. I think you've been with us every week since we started. So awesome.
Hey, Katie Bennett, do me a favor and shoot me your contacts. Okay? Thanks, hon.
Yeah, and if anyone
I was bragging about you the other day, and then I lost your stuff.
If anyone can share the Facebook Live, then do that. And Josh, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, great. Well, happy to have everybody here. Looks like we're still filling up, so thank you guys. Looking forward to today very much. So a few housekeeping things before we get started, and I'll make this quick. As you guys, if you've been on here before, this is the Intrepid Spirits Huddle. We'll be going and have some very special guests today that we're looking very forward to and can't wait to share some stories. And I'll let Dylan and Susan introduce our guests here in a second. As we go through, we would love to hear your questions, your comments, your thoughts. Please put those in the chat box down below. So as you think of a question, just throw it in and we'll be able to address those once we get to the question and answer period. And also, since we have a full agenda today, we're not able to talk to each other. I know a lot of friends and familiar faces on the call. Please go to the Facebook page so we can chat with each other, share information, and also look for a recording of this huddle on the Facebook channel. So with that said, and if any other questions pop up, please let me know on the chat. I'm going to turn over to Dill and we'll get started right away.
Great. Well, full day today. Welcome aboard. The sea is dangerous. Its storms are terrible. But these have never been sufficient reasons to remain ashore. Unlike timid souls, intrepid spirits seek victory over those things that seem impossible. It is with an iron will that they embark on the most daring of all adventures to meet the shadowy future without fear and conquer the unknown. So today I just want to give a quick thought starter here. Poise. Poise is an attitude of confidence which comes from complete honesty. A belief in what you're doing is good for you and the customer, complete trust in the mission. And everybody knows our mission's always been to make a positive difference in people's lives. Okay, I'm proposing a couple different missions here. One, we're going to set the goal of getting everyone on the planet to treat each other the same as they would want to be treated. And number 2, we want to declare the first Tuesday of November a national holiday. Everyone can go out and vote. We need to then, number 2 on that deal, trust the system, the voting system. And lastly, support the outcome. And yes, I totally realize this is going to take years. But I totally believe that I'm going to do this till the day I die, work at this, because I believe it's a worthy mission and it's the only way forward. With that, Sunshine, it's all yours.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So excited about our guest today, Cortni Emanuel. I'll never forget the first day that she walked into the office that Dill and I were in at the Athletic Academic Center, and that bright smile on her face. And we were talking about where a lot of those days she would wear her hair on the top of her head, and Dill was always like concerned on how she wore her softball helmet with her bun on her head. But just she always had this, just, and still today has this wonderful smile on her face. And she was one of the young students that took advantage of the opportunities that were given her, and she succeeded amazingly on the softball field, winning all kinds of SEC awards and All-American awards, and being a leader on her team, and knowing how, is it called a slapper, right, Cortni?
Yes.
Is that what it is? She's one of the best in the world. So if you have any young girls that want to understand softball and learn the techniques, I would encourage you to contact Cortni. That's what she's doing with her future, is to coach and teach, and then more importantly is to be an amazing mentor for these young ladies. She did a Facebook Live the other day, and I jumped on it and saw her working with some of the young girls, and it was absolutely amazing on the encouragement that she was giving them. So I would encourage you to follow up with her, especially if you have young girls that are playing softball. And so I asked her if she would come speak today, because I know that I read her post with everything going on about, being in her world and looking at, through her eyes, and how a lot of times we haven't taken the time to do that. And then she asked, well, can my dad join? And I'm like, of course your dad can join. And, and I've been really, I knew her dad, was an ex-NFL or retired NFL player, but I didn't know, I knew he was a business guy, but when she shared with us his bio, I was really, really impressed with the fact that his companies have helped make our women soldiers safer, with some of the technology and uniforms that they've created, and then the work that he's done with NASA on cooling their spacewalks and the uniforms. And then the one I really liked, though, was the U.S. Special Forces technology to help during cold water missions. Well, John, our son, is heading to Alaska in his final phases of Navy SEAL training, and I bet he's going to be having some of Bert's stuff in that cold water training. So thank you, Bert, personally, for what you've done. So Cortni, why don't you start us off, and she's going to share with us a little bit more about her dad and herself, and it's all yours, Cortni.
All righty. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dill and Susan, for having us on today. They have been tremendous mentors to me in Georgia and still today. So my dad here is Bert Emanuel. He was a former professional football player. Like Susan was saying, he played 9 years. He married his high school sweetheart, which is my mother, Terry Emanuel, and they had 5 kids. So I'm the second oldest out of the 5 kids. He went to Rice University previously, and so he was always, his goal was always to be an entrepreneur after football. And so I'll let him get into a little bit about his experiences that he's had in the business world and in sports. And then I'll go ahead and share my experiences after.
Well, thank you, Cortni. I think this is probably the first time I've been introduced by my daughter, so that was pretty cool. Thanks, Susan and Dill, and everyone for joining in. Even though I don't know you guys personally, I feel like I do know you personally, because Susan and Dill are so personable, and Cortni talks a lot about you guys and what you guys have done over the years, and really mentoring her. So I want to thank you guys for that. It's been a joy, as a parent, to see all of our kids, very successful. And I think the success for me and the satisfaction for me and Mom, my wife, Terry, their mom, is hearing that they're good people. We kind of know that they come by the athletics, honestly, because we were both, very successful as athletes, but more than that, we wanted them to be recognized as good people. And so that's been really, really special. So I told Cortni, in just kind of preparing for this talk, that, this is her deal, and I'm excited to be a guest. And so I wanted to share just a few things about my experiences. I graduated from high school, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, back in 1989. And yes, our kids always say, "You were born in the 80s? Or you went to high school in the 80s?" Like that was so long ago, right? But that was, pre-cell phones, pre-internet, and it was really kind of a time where, people communicated a little bit more, I think, and before social media had such a huge impact. I think, looking at, what we're dealing with today in terms of some of the social injustices, and looking at society, when I grew up, I faced some of those things. I remember, I was, as a senior in high school, baseball was always my first love. People think of me now as the NFL player, but baseball was really my first love. And so I was drafted as a senior in high school to play pro baseball. Ended up going out to UCLA on a football scholarship. And I remember the head coach telling me that I could not play baseball because I had been drafted in baseball. And I just really couldn't understand that. But really more than that, I think I played quarterback. And, I was told as a freshman at UCLA that, they would never, play a black quarterback. And, as an 18-year-old, that was pretty tough to hear. I didn't really understand the magnitude of what was being communicated, but after I started receiving letters, death threats, basically, if I ever stepped foot on the field, that something bad would happen to me. That was really kind of a firsthand experience of some of the injustices that that we see and that we read about and that we hear about today. And so that was tough, as a young teen, growing up in Houston, Texas, not really dealing with a lot of that, as a youth, but then going out to, a different part of our nation and experiencing that firsthand. And so that's something that has stood out in my mind over the years. I think, as time went on, I eventually transferred from UCLA to Rice University. And at Rice, I was able to play baseball. I was also able to play football. I got drafted again by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And then I got drafted the very next spring by the Atlanta Falcons. And in talking to the NFL at that time, things started surfacing again. I was a black quarterback. There wasn't a lot of black quarterbacks in the NFL at the time. And what was communicated to me firsthand was, if you want to play in the NFL, then you have to change positions. You're too talented to play quarterback. And so, I never really understood, that type of word choice. I thought at that time, teams would be interested in putting the best players on the field, regardless of skin color or religion or any other differences that people had with other people. And so that one hurt. I think that one probably hurt more than what I faced at UCLA, because at that point it was looked at as though I was good enough talent-wise, but I wasn't good enough for that position-wise. And so that was one that really stuck with me for a while. And, at that point, I really started talking to my wife about race and, some of the experiences that I had. My wife is she's a mixed race or biracial. Her mom's white, her dad's black. So she grew up in a little bit of a different environment where, she kind of understood both sides of the equation. However, they were a little bit shielded, and though from the aspect of not really, experiencing those things head on. And so we vowed, as a couple, to raise our kids from that standpoint, to understand, to always do their best, understand that excellence is something not to be desired, but something to reach for and to accomplish in everything that they do. And to understand that they may experience things that are hard to understand just because of the color of their skin, but don't let that hold them back. And so that was really our commitment at that particular time. Now I decided to go ahead and convert and change my position. I had a great career, no regrets from that standpoint. Played, almost 10 years in the NFL. I got an NFL rule named after me, which is really, really cool. It did cost me a Super Bowl ring, but it's still cool to say that I had some type of positive impact on the game as a whole. And I think from there, I really wanted to transition into the business world. And I did it, I think, initially selfishly, because I had another experience with my sports agent. And I had talked about, I think it was my second or third year in the NFL, about really investing my money into whether it was stocks or, some type of existing business or land. And I was really, really interested in learning, because I knew that being a professional athlete had its limit, right? The average NFL career was 2.2 years. You receive your pension at 4 years. So the odds were against me of lasting any more than that and being able to, satisfy retirement income. And so I really wanted to, diversify and really get into things outside of the game. And so I asked my agent about, hey, look, I really want to, start investing. You want to look outside the game, try to, prepare for retirement. And the response was, well, you're an athlete and you should only focus on being an athlete. And, so I questioned, well, what do you mean I'm just an athlete? And I should only focus on being an athlete. And he said, well, that's who you are. And I said, that's not who I am. That is what I do. And there's a big difference. And so, at that point, once I left the game, I felt like proving to myself that I was more than just an athlete. I had more value than running and jumping and catching and throwing, and just kind of threw myself into business. And that's, had some successes, some highs, some lows. My bio reads about all the successes, but it doesn't show anything about all the failures, right? And so there were a lot of lessons there, but I had the third, I think, experience in terms of feeling discriminated against was we had a vendor. We were getting ready to produce on a military contract. We were very, very successful with it. And we had a vendor up in the Northeast that I had to go meet. And we had been doing business for about 6 months, and we had paid on time. As a matter of fact, we had paid 5 days early every single time that our accounts payable was due. And I decided to jump on a plane and go visit this particular vendor face to face, shake his hand, thank him for the service, and introduce myself personally and sit down to really plan out the future. And as I was sitting in the lobby, a gentleman passed by. I'd never seen the gentleman before that owned the facility. And he passed by, and I could hear in the back the conversation. He asked the young lady that was sitting at the desk, I thought you told me Mr. Emanuel was here to see me. And she said, yes, he's here. He's in the lobby. And what I heard later was, you mean the black gentleman sitting in the lobby? And she said, yes, kind of hesitantly. And he reminded her at that point and said, you know, I don't know if you remember, but I don't do business with Black people. And, you know, I think that was tough, you know, because I felt like from a business perspective, I had done, you know, everything that I could do to position myself, you know, professionally, respectfully, and, you know, to be judged later, not necessarily by performance or lack thereof, but be judged by the color of my skin. You know, that was that was tough. And so the young lady stepped from behind the desk. She walked over to me. She had tears in her eyes. She apologized. She handed me a note, and on that note, it said, "I'm sorry, and here's another contact for you." And so, you know, I say all that to say that, you know, sometimes, and I heard this past Sunday at our church, our pastor was speaking about it. Sometimes our experiences are unique, and sometimes people's experiences aren't enough to understand in terms of what other people experience. And so just because maybe it doesn't happen to you or to someone else doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen. And so those things are real. Those are real in my life. I've never, you know, allowed those things to hold me back. And for most of the time, I've been, you know, very motivated to push forward and to drive forward. You know, poise. It's funny, Dil, you mentioned poise. As a high school athlete, I used to tape my left wrist, and I used to write poise across my wrist. And once I graduated from high school, I've got a book, a binder, and I've got every single tape band written with poise across it. And that was one of the things that I really focused our kids to understand: poise in the face of chaos, you know, poise in the face of distraction. You know, and you can always rely on poise to be, you know, the spirit of success. And so, you know, I take that very seriously. And I pray that, you know, going forward, that our country and our nation as a whole, you know, will start embracing poise and begin to share and communicate, you know, across racial lines. And hopefully we can come to, you know, the point where people can start listening and understanding that those communications and those things are happening in our country. So I'm excited to kind of see the fruits of our labor here with Cortni, and just been really, really proud of everything that she's accomplished. I know she's had some tough experiences as well, but and I'll let her share about those. But it's just been really, really awesome to see, you know, success. The Facebook communication, I was actually monitoring it, and it's funny, you know, Mom was saying, "You're gonna jump in? Are you gonna jump in?" I'm like, "No, I think she can handle this one." And so she did a marvelous job of keeping her poise, sharing her experiences, talking about, you know, possible solutions. And I think that's what our country needs at this point is just a moment where we can take a step back and understand that these things are real. They've happened before, and, you know, how can we move forward together as opposed to separately? So I think
Thanks,
that's
Dad.
it, Court.
Thanks, Dad. One thing he didn't explain was as he was preparing to go to meet the vendor, how he prepared. And as a young child at this point, I think I was had to be, you know, 8 in elementary school. And I was watching how he was preparing, and he was conversating with my mom. And I remember hearing him say, you know, I can't go with jewelry. I can't go looking flashy. I need to look plain because I don't want to be stereotyped off the top. And seeing that, that kind of summed up my childhood. I think as a young child, my parents definitely always wanted to make sure we were prepared. And what preparation looked like for a young Black child was making sure we handled our emotions, number one, because the label for young woman and woman as you get older is you don't want to be that young, that Black, mad Black woman. And for me, I know my dad talked a lot about poise and composure, and I was very passionate playing. One of my teammates is on here, Mary Wilson. She can attest to that, I was very competitive. And my dad would always preach to me, there's a certain way you have to handle yourself, because if you show anger and you show a lot of emotion and feistiness and all of that, you can be labeled. So there's a certain way that you have to present to yourself. And so I too, on my glove, I would write poise and composure. Another thing he always told us was stay professional with the way you dress. And that also included things you wore, because if you wore flashy jewelry, you could be labeled. And for women, natural hair, right? My hair is naturally curly. I have naturally curly hair, and it's not straight. It doesn't look like everybody else's. So when I go into a professional interview or talking to college coaches, I have to make sure I look a certain way, because, seeing natural curly hair, that can be stereotypical for a Black woman. So those were two things that he really poured into us being young women. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, when my dad played for the Falcons, and moved to Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas, if anybody has ever visited, is super diverse. You walk into the store, you see Blacks, Asians, Indians, whites, you see people of all color. And I played softball, I played volleyball, and I ran track. And so volleyball and softball were predominantly white sports. So I was used to growing up being the minority. I didn't have any other Black girls in my class until I was in 5th grade. I was in private school most of my life. But it wasn't really until Georgia that I really kind of understood that there is still racism in this country. I remember going to Georgia. My dad was like, okay, you're going to the heart of the South. Like, do you know what that means? And I was like, no, like, I'll be fine. And kind of took it with a grain of salt. I love Georgia. I loved all the experiences I had. I love my teammates. We all came from different backgrounds. Some of my teammates came from places where they never had a Black person on their softball team. They never grew up with a Black person in their city. For me, I wasn't used to that. I was used to everybody kind of intermingling. When I went to Georgia, I really felt like it was modern day segregation. Everything was both subliminal and very obvious too. There was comments that were said that people didn't realize were hurtful. For example, I remember walking into my locker room and I had a teammate who we were talking about going to a party, and I asked her if she wanted to come, and I said, hey, do you want to come with us? We're going to get together, do this, do that. And her response was, I don't want to come because I'll be the only white person there. And my response to her was, do you not understand that I'm the only Black person in a 300-person class? Do you not understand I'm the only Black person on the team besides my sister? Do you not understand when I go into the grocery store, I'm typically a minority there? And she was like, oh, wow, like I never realized that. And to me, that just shows that, number one, I feel like just the same way my dad was saying, I feel like it's hard for us to step out and see the other person's perspective. For me, I grew up diverse, so people intermingling was not, taboo. Another experience I had was I remember walking to the locker room one day, and I had a teammate walk in with a cooler, and on the cooler there was a Confederate flag. I've never seen one in real life at this point. In Texas, again, Houston, diverse, you don't see people driving around with Confederate flags in their trucks or at the front of their house. And I remember seeing it, and I was shocked, I was stunned, and I was like, this is real. And, some people see this as a symbolism for pride, Southern pride. And for me, it's a symbolism of slavery and oppression. And so seeing that, I have a great relationship with this teammate. It hurt me. It made me feel very uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, if you are very prideful in this symbol, then how do you really look at me? What are you saying about Black men and Black women in your own families? I have Black men. I have a younger brother who's a Black male. He's 16 years old. I have a father who's Black. I have sisters and a mother who's Black. So that was very hard. I had my last instance was at Georgia. We had a seminar, and we had the speaker was speaking on diversity, and he was speaking on understanding people outside of who your typical group was. So kind of like cliques, it was race, it was experience, where you came from, a whole bunch of different things. And at the end of the seminar, we had strings in our hands. We were given strings, and we passed the string to somebody of a different culture, different background, came from somewhere else. And so I remember one of my teammates walked up to me and she hugged me and she looked at me and she said, "I never knew Black people could be normal like you." And I immediately, I didn't know how to respond. I was just like, oh, wow. Yeah, there's Black people are normal too. We're human. Our skin is just different. But because of the skin I'm in, I was labeled and stereotyped. And at Georgia, I always made myself open to my teammates. I'd always allow my teammates to ask me any questions, because a lot of them did not understand or did not have any experiences with other Black people. And so I'd always tell them, hey, if there's something you don't understand, you don't know, you don't agree with, come to me. I'm open. I'll talk to you. We can have that hard conversation. I'm more than willing to do that with you. Now, just one thing don't do is don't just make a statement, because that could come off disrespectful, uncomfortable, ignorant, the list goes on. So if there's something that you're unsure of, come to me and let's have that conversation. And a lot of my teammates had conversations with me. I have a teammate who came to me a couple of days ago, actually, and she said, my grandma told me, she's a white young lady, and she dates a Black guy. And she said, my grandma told me I can't bring home a cotton picker. And she was just in tears telling me this. And, honestly, I just told her, I said, just keep having these conversations, try and have these conversations. And so being open and being honest, several times I contemplated about making my Facebook post because I didn't want to deal with some ignorance. But I think that making that post actually opened up a lot of conversations that people are scared to have. And I think it's super, super important that we have to have these conversations. We have to learn how to see the other side, see different perspectives, even if we don't agree with them. And from that Facebook post, I had several conversations with different people. I had several conversations that didn't really go anywhere. I had somebody comment saying, why don't you go loot with your fellow idiots? I had just several different things. But for me, one of my teammates said, hey, I don't know how you're not going off on everybody. And I said, I was raised not to be that angry Black woman. I was raised to be classy. I was raised to be professional. And so I'm going to handle myself that way. So I know me and my dad have discussed several different things that we can do. I know he had a few things about reimagining the police department. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. Let's keep going.
Okay. We're going to leave, but that's fine. If anybody has to go, no problem. This will all be taped and on Facebook and YouTube.
Let's keep going.
Okay. Yeah, there was also one other question. I was looking at the chat, and it asked, what more would you like to see sports institutions do to address racism and discrimination? So I'll try to maybe cover both. I think when and I'll focus a little bit more on the defund the police comment first. At first, honestly, just personally, was when I started hearing about it, I'm always, I always come from a perspective of let's find the information first. Let's research first, react second, but research, let's find the information. let's see exactly what defund the police means, and how it's being perceived. I think there are a lot of conflicting statements about it. Personally, I think defund the police to some actually means to get rid of the police force. I think for some it means to repurpose. I think for some it means to reimagine. Um, to me, and these are my feelings and thoughts, I think that our law enforcement serves a purpose in terms of protecting. If there's an emergency, I would want to have someone to respond to help me in time of need. I do think, though, in the Black community, there are other aspects of what that looks like. Mental health is, a pretty big issue in the Black community. And so, if there's a domestic violence concern, the root of that may be rooted or grounded in some type of mental health issue. And if there is someone, a mental health worker that could respond as well to de-escalate the situation, I think that would be phenomenal. I think our police force and our law enforcement needs diversity training. I think there needs to be de-escalation training. I think we need to put more money into programs that would help our police officers police, and focus on, helping in times of need where there's a very real crime or there's a very real need for law enforcement. And I think also it would be very unique to have a social worker or, a mental health professional be there on scene to help de-escalate as well. I think that would be a really neat way of reimagining, our law enforcement and our personnel. I think, there are some studies that show, where defunding the police department and putting more funds into services that actually work have resulted in positive acceptance. And I think that's, again, a time for us to understand, research, and then think about having that open dialogue. I think for institutions, for sports institutions as a whole, we need dialogue. And I think there needs to be diversity training. I think diversity training needs to occur in our teaching, our education system, our secondary school systems. I don't know if Cortni has shared this with you guys before, but her freshman year in high school, we were faced with a tremendous situation where her and her sister and 3 or 4 other of the Black kids on the volleyball team were pulled into a room, and they were accused of being a part of a Black group and accused of making the white kids uncomfortable and told that they could not sit together with their Black friends on the bus on the way to the games. When they got to the games, they couldn't sit together in the stadium because of the color of their skin. And so when I intervened, and I will have to say that I probably didn't use the most poise that I probably should have, but and it was more of a protective mechanism as a father, of having, our kids, put in a situation that they have actually no idea even existed. They didn't even know that bubble existed at the time. The first thing that I talked about with the administrators were, can you talk to me about diversity training for all educators? Can you talk to me about diversity training for students? Can you talk to me about diversity among the staff? Can you talk to me about the diversity among the student population? And I think for our institutions, there needs to be some more dialogue concerning diversity. People come from all different backgrounds, and that is awesome, that you should be able to understand different ways of life, different cultures. And I think that our teams, it's funny because our the staff makeup does not reflect the team makeup in a lot of ways. And I think there's an issue there with diversity. And so I think if we can start having a dialogue, you know, when I talked to our kids as we were watching some of the protests unfold, the early days, second, third, fourth day, was the first thing I said, and I'm Cortni may remember this. I said, what if one of the state legislators, what if the chief of police, what if the mayor, what if the governor actually went out, stood on a platform and had an open dialogue with the protesters? Let's see, what do you guys want? Where can we meet you guys? Where are we failing? Where are we succeeding? What can we talk about? And at that moment, I think at that moment, if that is happening, now we can start with some reconciliation and we can start with some actionable items that can be put in place. A lot of times, people may not understand exactly the flight, you know, that's going on. And so I think it starts with communication. I think it starts with honesty. I think these are hard conversations. You know, in my house growing up, we didn't talk a lot about it. It was kind of taboo. And, you know, those are just really difficult decisions to have those conversations with, you know, with your kids, you know, but I think that's one. I think, so dialogue is one. Two, I think the platforms that we have, the NFL, right? The NFL is one of the most powerful sports platforms in the world. If the NFL steps up and says, hey, look, we made a decision years ago about kneeling that was wrong. That's one thing. But then to say, okay, let's get to the root of why the kneeling occurred. Okay, it was a conversation between Kaepernick and a Green Beret, because Kaepernick originally sat down and the Green Beret said, now that to me as a Green Beret is disrespect. I would rather you kneel. I would rather you kneel in protest, because kneeling to me shows respect. And so Kaepernick followed that idea. And that was, you know, that was not enough. And so, you know, if the NFL could step up and say, hey, look, you know, we were wrong in a sense of not wrapping our arms around peaceful protest. We were wrong in a sense of turning our backs on social injustice. And we were wrong in a sense of putting Colin Kaepernick in a situation where we didn't quite understand what he was truly trying to communicate to us. That's an opportunity for change. The NBA, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, NHL, you know, those sports has the way of providing some level of leadership in our country. And that platform is huge, and it reaches a lot of different people at a lot of different phases in their lives. And if we can have our leaders that are really at the tops of those platforms really come out and make a strong statement, I think that would be really, really powerful. And then I think the third is in the homes, you know, moms and dads having those conversations with kids, you know, understanding that differences are not what separate us. Differences are what bind us together. And truly having those conversations, I think that would be, you know, really the source of change in our country.
Thanks, Dad. I want to leave. Can I leave us with a Bible verse?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, last thing here, I have Romans 12, verse 14 through 21. It says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but enjoy the company of the lowly. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Carefully consider what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible on your part, live at peace with everyone. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink, for in doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Very powerful.
Thank you guys.
Very powerful.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I know, well, we'll get them. We'll get the questions. I know you answered some of them, but there's some that aren't. So we'll get those to you, Courtney and Bert, and allow you to answer them, and then we'll put them out on our newsletter that we send out on Thursday. So,
Okay.
Dylan, are you going to close this down?
Okay. First of all, unbelievable. We need to have this. We need to continue this conversation. This is not a one and done. That's the first thing. But the thought starter that I'm going to leave you with is, as I told you about our new mission. So Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, which I used to call him Goethe, it's von Goethe, I found out today. He said, whatever you can do or dream, you can. Begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And my whole career has been based on that. Everything I ever did, everybody told me it wouldn't work. And, some of it didn't, Bert, but a bunch of it did, thank God.
Yeah.
And so here we sit, right? So I guess end with thank you, everybody be on board. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. I'll make sure we get a Dillism out this week. And Sunshine, hip, hip, hooray!
Right.
Hip, hip, hooray!
Hooray!
Hip, hip, hooray! Carry on.
Thank you, guys.
Make it a blessed week, everybody. And
Thank
let's
you.
communicate.
Thank
Talk.
you.
The
Thank
hard
you.
stuff. The hard
Yeah.
stuff.
Yes. Yes.
Bert.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.